everyone, and welcome to Business Boutique. I'm Christy Wright, and today we are talking about your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, this is a topic that I love because, first of all, it's really great to be self-aware, but second of all, it's really, really important for you to know your strengths and your weaknesses and how they affect your business and your life and, of course, your relationships. Now, I got to tell you guys, I have been a fan of all the personality tests for years, right? Like growing up in high school and college, I was in leadership classes. So I have taken about every personality test you can take. On the Myers-Briggs, I am an ENFP. On the Strengths Finders, one of my top strengths is positivity and activator, for example. On the DISC, I'm a very high I, which means you love people. Y'all know that about me. And I'm also a high D. And then recently, I have gotten into the Enneagram. Now, my friends told me, specifically Rachel Cruz told me all about the Enneagram before I'd ever taken a test or read the book or anything. She told me it's different. It's different. You got to know the Enneagram. You've got to read about the Enneagram. It's fascinating. It's different. I'm like, is it? Like, how is it different? Now, I'll tell you, you can always tell who's into the Enneagram because, well, they'll tell you. They are really, really proud of it. But I'll be honest. After getting into it myself, learning my number, reading the book, I get it. I see what the big deal is. It really is different than other personality tests because unlike other personality tests where you read your results, you read your report, and you're a little bit proud, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm good at so many things. Yeah, you don't get that feeling after the Enneagram. In fact, it kind of shows you where you're bad. Shows you what your weaknesses are, shows you those deeper motivations that aren't always really pretty in most of us. And so it can be a really eye-opening experience, but it's really helpful. It makes you feel understood, and more than that, helps you be more self-aware. Now, I'll tell you, in the Enneagram numbers, there are 9 numbers, and it's funny to see how different people talk about them. Like the 7s, y'all are just so stinking proud of being a 7. Anybody that's 7, they're like, well, I'm a 7. Well, the 7 in me, well, I would just like to broadcast that I am a 7. So, the fun ones. Okay, we get it. 7s are fun. They love a party. But here's the thing. You know what else is interesting? No one's bragging about being an 8. Yeah, the 8s are kind of the tough ones. Their title is actually called the Challenger. And it's those people that are a little intense, a little aggressive, blunt, honest, go-getters, but can pick a fight and hold their own every now and then. And you don't see any 8s walking around bragging about being an 8. Well, you guessed it. I'm an 8. I'm an 8-wing 7, and I will tell you, reading this chapter was so eye-opening for me. There were a couple specific lines in the book, The Road Back to You by Cron, who I'll be interviewing later on, and he'll also be speaking at our Business Boutique event. There were a couple lines in his book that y'all brought me to tears. I remember reading this book one day whenever I was getting a manicure. I was sitting there getting my fingernails done for an event coming up, and I was reading, and tears just started streaming down my face at feeling so understood. And even not even feeling understood by the author, by the book, by the number, I felt that I understood myself. I was like, oh, this is why I act this way. This is why I feel this way. Yeah, that's exactly how I see that situation. And so it's fascinating when you begin to understand not just how you behave, not even just how you think, but your deeper motivations and drivers and fears that affect those thoughts, that affect those feelings, that affect those behaviors. And I think it's really, really important for us to understand not just what our strengths are, but also what our weaknesses are. In fact, if you look at it, regardless of the personality style, a strength overused can be a weakness. So I'll give you an example of an 8 on the Enneagram, like I am. 8s are intense. They are fighters and go-getters. They make things happen. They will stick up for the little guy, for the underdog. They will fight for justice. They will make change. They will coach people. They'll bring out the best in others. But because they're so intense, they can be a little aggressive, a little too intense, a little too honest, too blunt. They can come across as hateful. They can come across as too aggressive and too intimidating. And so while you have one aspect of your personality that's a strength, when it's overused or not matured or not self-aware, it can be a weakness. Now, I tell you guys all the time, I want you to stay in your strengths. You are going to be the most successful, not just in business, but in life, when you stay in your strengths, when you stay in your lane, when you stay in your sweet spot, doing what God created you to do. But it's also important to know what your weaknesses are. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like talking about my weaknesses. I don't like thinking about them. It doesn't make you feel good, but we all have them. So we're going to spend a few minutes in this episode teaching you what to do with your weaknesses so that we can grow and improve them. I tell you guys all the time to stay in your strengths. You will be the most successful in business and life when you stay in your strengths. But here's what I really want for you. I want you to be self-aware. I want to be self-aware. And you know what that means? That means knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. There are so many benefits to being self-aware. For example, self-awareness is knowing how you come across to others. Not just how you intend to come across, but how you actually come across. And that will vary depending on who you're talking to or who you're interacting with. Because why? Because they are wired differently than you. And they're putting everything you say, everything you do, every aspect of your body language through their own personal filter of how God created them. But it's so important for you to know if there are themes or patterns in how you come across. I'll give you an example. I've heard a pattern in my life that I am intense, that I am aggressive. Okay. Well, I'll be so honest with you guys. I don't intend to be aggressive. I don't think I'm intense. I think I'm just me. I'm enthusiastic, sure. Passionate, definitely. But intense, aggressive, I wouldn't use those words. Not ever. But you know what? After hearing them enough times, I started to pay attention. This is how I come across to other people. Intense, aggressive. So you know what that does? It gives me a different level of self-awareness to know not only how I intend to come across, but how I actually come across. And I can adjust my tone or behavior or volume level based on who I'm talking to. Self-awareness means that you know both sides of the coin. You know your strengths so you can leverage them, but also your weaknesses so that you can work on them. Self-awareness also, in fact, leads to likability and success. There is a direct correlation between likability and success and a high self-awareness. So it's really important for us to be self-aware, which means knowing both the good, the bad, and everything in between. So I want to spend a few minutes in this episode teaching you what to do with the not so good stuff. We know our strengths. We talk about our strengths all the time. We love focusing on the strengths, but let's focus on the less pretty side of ourselves. Let's talk about our weaknesses and what we do with them. Well, the first thing that I want you to do with your weaknesses are to recognize them. Here's what that means. That means being self-aware, understanding for yourself that this area of your life is a weakness, that this is a blind spot. Y'all, we all have them. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you that you have a blind spot. We all have blind spots. Now, you know what a blind spot is, right? You're driving in the car. You want to change lanes. You start to get over and someone blares the horn at you because they're actually in that lane and you're coming over and you didn't realize it. Well, why didn't you realize it? It's a blind spot. You didn't see them. You didn't know they were there. That's what some of these weaknesses are like for us. We're not even aware that they're there. I wasn't even aware that I came across as aggressive or intense. It's a blind spot. So what are your blind spots? Now, obviously, if you don't know what they are, it's really helpful to have people tell you. There's a few ways that you can figure out what your blind spots are. There's a few ways that you can recognize what your weaknesses are for yourself. One way is pay attention to patterns of what people say about you. Are you seeing a theme? Are people always saying the same thing about you? Like, oh, wow, you're so quiet. You're so passive. You never say anything. You never stand up for yourself. There's a pattern there. I obviously fall on the opposite end of the spectrum. Wow, you're so loud. You're so intense, so passionate, so enthusiastic, so energetic, so excited, so aggressive, right? Like you start to see a pattern in what people say about me. So what do people say about you? Now, if you don't see a pattern immediately, if you haven't picked up on this over time, you can actually ask people. You can ask people what they're thinking, how they're feeling, how you come across, how they perceive you. Hey, did that come across weird? Hey, what were you thinking in that meeting whenever I was presenting this thing? Or hey, what were you thinking during this pitch? You can actually ask people, and then if those people know you, if they feel safe with you, they will tell you what they actually think. They will tell you how you come across to other people. Another way for you to figure out what your weaknesses are is to take a personality test. So the Enneagram is very helpful when it comes to focusing on your weaknesses. You can also take the DISC assessment or the Myers-Briggs or something else. And usually most of those assessments will show you the good and the bad. We always focus on the good, which is great, but you also can learn about the bad stuff, the flaws, the setbacks, the hurdles, the challenges that each of us have. So the very first thing that I want you to do with your weaknesses is simply to recognize them. You can't work on something you don't know about. You can't steer clear of a blind spot that you don't know is there. So the first thing is simply to recognize for yourself what those weaknesses are, and that really comes down to self-awareness. Now, the second thing that I want you to do is to acknowledge them. That means I want you to actually call them out. I want you to own them. I want you to be forthcoming with your weaknesses. And that's not to say you've got to broadcast them. You've got to walk around telling everyone about all of your downfalls or your temptations or your frustrations or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you sense that you are acting out of a weakness or you are coming across in a certain way, go ahead and call it out. Go ahead and acknowledge it with the other person so they don't have to. Here's what's so amazing about this. When you go ahead and acknowledge that you are aware that this is a weakness or you're struggling with this, what it does is it completely disarms the other person. They feel immediate relief because they don't have to call you out. They don't even feel the pressure of the awkwardness in the room like, man, this person's being crazy. I wonder if they know they're being crazy. Should I tell them they're being crazy? They don't have to do that because you said, hey, I know I'm being crazy, but like you call it out. I'll give you an example. I have a leader named Jeremy Breland over the personalities, and he has worked with me for years. So he knows that I have 100 ideas a day, truly. And one of the things that we struggle with my ideas is, first of all, not all of them are good. Second of all, we can't possibly execute on all of them with the team and resources that we have, but I just continue to have them. So here's an example. I will walk in his office and I will say, Jeremy, listen, I know I have 100 ideas a day. However, I've got one more. I just want to put it in front of you. If we can't move forward with it, that's totally fine. But I just wanted to throw this out there. Now, see, when I walked in and acknowledged, hey, it's a weakness of mine that I have 9 million ideas and expect them all to go through and they don't. So I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that up front. I'm going to go ahead and put everyone at ease that I realize I do this every day. Here's what's so great about this. You can move forward on the same baseline with the other person. I acknowledge that I have 100 ideas a day. He acknowledges that I have 100 ideas a day. He knows that I know that he knows, I know that he knows that I know that I have this weakness. Y'all, it's amazing how beneficial that can be. Now, let's just say I don't acknowledge it. Let's give a completely different scenario where I go busting in his office. I go, hey, Jeremy, I've got this new idea and we've got to do it. This is what we've got to do. And he's like, yeah, we've been here before. We do this every day, right? Like it completely disarms the other person when you acknowledge it. So what is that weakness? What is something you're feeling or a behavior you're exhibiting? What is maybe just something where you're having a tough time? I'll give you a really real life, very current behind the scenes example. I came in today exhausted, a little grumpy, a little on the grouchy side. I wasn't hiding it well, okay? And I realized this. I realized that I was grouchy and grumpy. And I also realized that it's no one's fault around me that I was grouchy and grumpy. So I stopped before we even started recording this podcast. And I said to my podcast producer, hey, I want you to know I'm just tired. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just tired. I'm tired at home. I don't sleep at night. We've been on camera all day. I'm just tired. I'm so sorry I've come across so grouchy because I'm just tired. It's not you, it's me. Now, what's so amazing about this is not that it completely solved the problem and I'm 100% less grouchy or less tired, but we both could acknowledge what was really going on in the situation. So what's going on with you? What situation are you in where you might be either tired or frustrated or feeling insecure, or you got 100 ideas a day, or you're getting angry or making assumptions about someone? Stop and say, hey, here's what's really going on. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's why I'm acting this way. Here's why I'm saying this in this way. Here's why I'm looking at this from this angle. If you simply acknowledge where you're coming from, and maybe the weaknesses that are influencing that, it's amazing how it can be so beneficial to you and the other person in that scenario. So the first thing I want you to do with your weaknesses is to recognize them for yourself. This is self-awareness. But the second thing I want you to do is to acknowledge them with the other person you're interacting with. It's amazing how this will disarm the situation and takes the pressure off the other person of feeling this awkwardness like, do they know they're being crazy? You're like, yeah, I do. I'm so sorry. I'm being crazy. Let's move forward with this baseline of understanding that I'm being crazy. So when you recognize them and then you acknowledge them immediately, it takes the pressure off you and the other person. But there's one more step. You're not totally off the hook. This doesn't mean that you just get to go around blasting your weaknesses as a pass to continue to act that way. It doesn't mean that, oh, well, this is a weakness of mine. Well, I struggle with details, so I'll never pay attention again. Or I'm always late. I really struggle to be on time, so I'll just be late everywhere. I'm just a passionate person, so sometimes I'm just going to be hot-headed and angry. So too bad. This is how God made me. No. We don't get a free pass just because we recognize it and acknowledge it. We actually have a third step. I want you to work on your weaknesses. See, it's so easy to feel like, oh, well, this is how God made me. And we just use that as an excuse to be quick-tempered, to be hateful, to be fill in the blank, whatever that thing is. That might be true. That might be a weakness for you. That might be a struggle or temptation for you. That might even be a blind spot for you. But it doesn't mean that you get to stay there. It doesn't mean that you get to use that as an excuse or a free pass to be hateful, to be passive, to fill in the blank with whatever that weakness is. Instead, you need to work on it. We all need to work on our weaknesses to grow, to mature, to be better human beings in the world. But we can't do that if we don't actively work on those things. So, I told you guys I'm aggressive and intense and passionate and all of those things. I could just say, well, too bad. That's how I am. I'm an Enneagram 8. Too bad, take it or leave it. No. Here's the thing. You can actually work on these things and you can grow in these areas in ways that you would not believe. Instead, sometimes I need to learn to be quiet. I need to learn to submit. I need to learn to respect authority a lot more. I need to learn to apologize quicker. I need to learn to let someone else lead. I need to learn to sit back and shut my mouth sometimes. That doesn't mean that I always just get to take the lead and do what I want to. Instead, I'm learning to work on my weaknesses. So once you know what your weaknesses are and you've called them out with other people, it's still on you to work on them. You don't get to say, oh, that's just the way that I am. Instead, you're going to mature and you're going to take personal responsibility to work on those things. I remember sitting in a conversation with my leader, Jeremy Breland, years ago, and he was coaching me on something. And everything in me wanted to fight. Everything in me wanted to defend myself and tell him why that wasn't the accurate situation or that wasn't the representation of how I meant to act or how things meant to go and so on. Everything in me wanted to defend myself as he's giving me some constructive criticism. But you know what I did instead? I bit my tongue, which that right there is a spiritual gift. If you can do that, especially if you're like me, I bit my tongue and I said, I'm so sorry. I'll do better. I will work on that and I will do better. Y'all, those words are so helpful in any situation. Maybe someone's giving you some feedback that's hard to hear. Maybe you had a fight with your spouse and you feel like you are so right and they are so wrong. Just simply choosing to work on your part of it, taking personal responsibility of how you contributed to whatever that situation is and saying, you know what, I'm sorry. I'm tired. I'm sorry I'm grouchy. I'm sorry I spoke up too much. I'm sorry I stepped on your toes. I'm sorry I came across hateful. I'm sorry for how I contributed to that. I'm sorry and I'll do better. Of course, I want you to live in your strengths, but I also want you to work on your weaknesses. And it also, when you do this, when you work on your weaknesses and acknowledge them and recognize them, here's another byproduct of that. You naturally have more grace for other people's weaknesses. You see them acting out of their weakness and you realize, you know what? I've been there. I can have a little bit of grace and empathy for them as well. I love how Bob Goff says, love difficult people. You're one of them. It's amazing what a gift that is for the other person when you not only recognize your weaknesses and acknowledge them, but then you choose to go above that and continue to work on them and be better. I'll tell you guys, this is a long journey. I would love to flip a switch and not struggle with these things that I struggle with. I know you would too. but this is a long journey of working on your weaknesses. But if you do these 3 things, if you recognize them, if you acknowledge them, and then you work on them, I promise you will not only become more self-aware, you will not only be a more mature, well-rounded, pleasant person to be around, you will also improve every relationship and interaction in your life. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you need help working in your strengths and building a business around your strengths, you don't want to miss the Business Boutique Conference, October 24th through the 26th. There are still a few seats left, and you can get your tickets and find out more information by clicking the link below.